Have you ever wondered how the financial performance of Apple compares to Microsoft? These two titans of technology have been at the forefront of innovation, shaping our digital lives for decades. Yet, their approaches to business and growth couldn't be more different. Apple, with its iconic iPhone, has created an ecosystem of products and services that millions around the world can't live without. On the other hand, Microsoft, with its ubiquitous Windows and Office software, has become an indispensable part of businesses and homes alike. But beyond the products and the brand names, it's the financials that truly tell the story of a company's health and potential for future growth. Understanding these numbers is crucial for making informed investment decisions. So, let's take a closer look at the financial performance of Apple and Microsoft. Stay tuned as we delve into the numbers and see how these tech giants stack up against each other. First, let's look at the total revenues of both companies at the end of 2023. Apple, the tech giant known for its iPhones and MacBooks, reported a whopping $383 billion. On the other hand, Microsoft, the software powerhouse behind Windows and Office suite, had a total revenue of $212 billion. Looking at the 5-year compound annual growth rate, or CAGR, we see an interesting trend. Apple's CAGR was 8%, while Microsoft's was a more impressive 14%. This shows that while Apple's revenue was significantly higher, Microsoft's growth rate was almost twice as fast. Now, let's delve a bit deeper into why this is the case. From 2021 to 2023, Apple's revenue growth slowed and even decreased slightly. This is likely due to market saturation for iPhones and fierce competition in the tech industry. Meanwhile, Microsoft continued to see steady growth. This is largely due to their successful transition to cloud-based services, which has proven to be a lucrative move. So what does this tell us? Well, it's clear that while Apple's revenue was significantly higher, Microsoft's growth rate was faster. This could suggest that Microsoft's strategy of diversifying its services and focusing on the cloud is paying off. On the other hand, Apple's reliance on the iPhone for over half of its revenue could be a potential vulnerability if the smartphone market continues to slow. It's worth mentioning that these figures are not the whole story. Other factors, such as profitability, efficiency, and cash flow, also play a crucial role in the financial health of a company. But for now, it's enough to say that both Apple and Microsoft are hugely successful companies with different strategies and strengths. It's clear that while Apple has higher revenues, Microsoft has a higher growth rate. But where exactly is this revenue coming from? Let's delve deeper into that. For Apple, the revenue breakdown looks like this. Over half of their revenue, 52% to be exact, comes from their flagship product, the iPhone. The Mac contributes 8%, while the iPad chips in with 7%. Surprisingly, the wearables, home and accessories category accounts for 11%, showing a growing trend in this sector. Lastly, services, which includes the App Store, Apple Music and iCloud, make up 22% of their total revenue. Contrastingly, Microsoft's revenue breakdown tells a different story. The largest chunk, 41%, comes from Intelligent Cloud, their cloud computing service. Productivity and business processes, which includes Office, LinkedIn, and Dynamics, contribute 33%. Lastly, personal computing, which covers Windows, Xbox, and Surface, brings in 26% of their total revenue. Now let's look at how this revenue is distributed geographically. For Apple, 42% of the revenue comes from the Americas, 25% from Europe, 19% from Greater China, and the remaining 14% from other parts of the world. Microsoft, on the other hand, has a more balanced distribution with 50% of their revenue coming from the United States and the other half from other countries. It's interesting to note how different the revenue sources are for these two tech giants. Apple relies heavily on their hardware, with the iPhone being their main revenue driver. On the other hand, Microsoft leans more towards software and services, with a significant portion of their revenue coming from their cloud computing service. In terms of geographical distribution, Apple has a more diversified revenue stream, with significant contributions from the Americas, Europe, and Greater China. Microsoft has a more concentrated revenue stream, with half of their revenue coming from the United States. It's fascinating to see how different their revenue sources are. But revenue is not the whole story. What about profitability and efficiency? Let's start with gross profit margin. In 2023, Apple's gross profit margin stood at 44%, compared to a 5-year average of 41%. Microsoft, on the other hand, boasted a higher gross profit margin of 69%, slightly above its 5-year average of 68%. Next, let's look at net profit margins. Apple's net profit margin was 25% in 2023, up by 1 percentage point from the 5-year average. Microsoft impressively outperformed, featuring a net profit margin of 34%, 3 percentage points higher than its 5-year average. Now, let's discuss total assets and net assets. Apple's total assets amounted to $353 billion, while Microsoft's total assets were $412 billion. However, when it comes to net assets, Apple had $62 billion, significantly lower than Microsoft's $206 billion. This brings us to the equity to total assets ratio. For Apple, it was 18%, while Microsoft boasted a higher ratio of 50%. Let's not forget about the current and quick ratios. Apple's current ratio was 0.99, and its quick ratio was 0.94. Microsoft outperformed in both metrics, with a current ratio of 1.77 and a quick ratio of 1.75. Lastly, let's delve into operational efficiency. Apple had an inventory days figure of 7 days and accounts receivable days of 20 days. Microsoft's inventory days were 13 days and accounts receivable days were 59 days. Here, Apple outshines Microsoft, indicating a superior operational efficiency. So, what's the takeaway here? While Microsoft seems to have a higher profit margin, Apple appears to be more operationally efficient. It's a fascinating comparison, isn't it? These factors, among others, are crucial to consider when evaluating the financial health of these tech giants. While Microsoft seems to have a higher profit margin, Apple appears to be more operationally efficient. Opening. How about cash flow and return on equity? Let's delve into the cash flow analysis. In 2023, Apple generated an operating cash flow of $111 billion, while Microsoft generated $88 billion. This indicates how much cash is being produced from the core business operations, without considering capital expenditures. When we deduct capital expenditures, we get the free cash flow. For Apple, it stood at $100 billion, and for Microsoft, it was $60 billion. This is the cash that the companies have free to invest in growth opportunities, pay dividends, or buy back shares. Now, let's examine the ability of these companies to convert their net income into cash, also known as the operating cash flow to net income ratio. Apple's ratio is 1.1, while Microsoft's is slightly higher at 1.2. These figures suggest that both companies are efficient at converting their profits into actual cash flow. Moving on to the return on equity, or ROE, which is a measure of financial performance calculated by dividing net income by shareholders' equity. Essentially, it's what these companies can generate in terms of profits from the money that's been invested by the shareholders. In 2023, Apple's ROE was a whopping 208%, thanks to its net profit margin of 25%, an asset turnover of 1.45, and an asset-to-equity ratio of 5.67. On the other hand, Microsoft's ROE stood at 47% with a higher net profit margin of 34%, but a lower asset turnover of 0.73 and a lower asset-to-equity ratio of 2. Closing. Apple's high ROE is due to its high asset-to-equity ratio, largely resulting from its dividend and share buyback policy. This policy reduces the equity base, thereby magnifying the return on equity. So this is something to bear in mind when comparing the ROE of these two tech giants. So, who's the winner in this financial face-off? Well, that's a tough call. Both Apple and Microsoft have demonstrated robust financial performance. Apple, with a total revenue of $383 billion and a net profit of $97 billion in 2023, has shown impressive growth, despite a slowdown in recent years. On the other hand, Microsoft, with a total revenue of $212 billion and a net profit of $72 billion, has maintained consistent growth with a 5-year compound annual growth rate of 14%. In terms of profitability, Microsoft takes the lead with a higher net profit margin. However, Apple's operational efficiency is quite remarkable, with shorter inventory and accounts receivable days. In short, both tech giants exhibit solid financial health and growth prospects. As we've seen, both companies have their strengths and weaknesses, but in the end, understanding these financials can help you make better investment decisions.